Richard is one of them. He has a publication called Macro Watch, M-A-C-R-O. It's $250. It's a video. If you speak English, I would subscribe to it. I subscribe to it. Because what's going on in the world today is changing so fast that if you subscribe to Richard and Macro Watch, you will get a different point of view on the world economy. That information could be the most valuable thing you can get. So it's called Macro Watch. Is it for sale over there? Over there?
Yes, all around the
okay.
room, all of the booths.
So even if you don't understand this all that well, he is the man I listen to. That's why I have him on stage with me. Okay? Very smart guy. Worked with the World Bank and IMF. Still consults to major funds. Went to Babson and Vanderbilt. Classically trained economist. But he also lives in Thailand. So if you have a chance, subscribe to Macro Watch. It's a video presentation. And it's Richard explaining the changes as the world economy changes. Okay?
Thank you, Robert. So in this chart, again, please put it back up. This changed the world. This is what you have to understand. When a big country like the United States, in 1 year, can buy $800 billion worth of goods from other countries, this made the global economy boom. Now, in my first book, The Dollar Crisis, this was written in 2002, and the theme of the dollar crisis was that these trade deficits of the United States could not go on forever. And when they corrected, then the world would have a very serious global depression. And that's what happened in 2008. So once the Americans started buying less, the whole global economy went into crisis. And we came this close to collapsing into a new Great Depression. This close. The US government and all the governments around the world had to borrow and spend trillions of dollars to keep the global economy from collapsing. And the central banks around the world had to print trillions of paper dollars and inject them in, use that new money to buy bonds and stocks. And that reflated the global economy. That prevented the depression. Look what China did. This chart shows you all of the bank loans in China, how much money the Chinese banks lend. The arrow points to 2009, when the crisis happened. After 2009, Chinese banks tripled their loans, tripled the amount of bank loans that they had. This made China's economy boom for a few more years, and China imported more and more from Vietnam and Japan and the United States and the whole world. But now, China's boom is over. The Great China boom has ended. China has an economic bubble, a lot like the bubble that was here in Vietnam 10 years ago. Too many buildings, too many factories. Those loans now can't be repaid. So China's gone into crisis. And China is no longer buying more and more goods from the rest of the world every year. This is what you can see in this chart. This shows you how much China is importing from the rest of the world this year compared to last year. And for many years, China's imports would grow by 20 or 30% every year, but no more. China was the driver of global growth for several years, but no more. China's gone into crisis. And this year, you can see at the end, China's imports last month were 18% less than they were 1 year ago. Every month this year, China's imports have fallen by 10 to 20%. And so China's buying much less from the rest of the world. It's buying less commodities. And so commodity prices are crashing.
Could you go back 1 second? One of the reasons I like Richard's work, and I'll stress it again, please subscribe to Macro Watch. Years ago, when I first came across the dollar crisis, what Richard explained to me, or the world, was that what China has been doing is they've been building factories that are empty, right? These factories are empty. Then they started to build apartment houses and real estate. And at one time there was 6 million new condominiums in China that nobody lives in. And then they started to build cities that people don't live in. So what this did for a year, that's when I was talking, when I first met Richard, he says, there's something funny going on. They're building things they'll never use. And then the other thing that Richard said that was quite shocking was everybody thinks China's wages are low. China's wages went up. So that's why they have to move to Vietnam and to Pakistan and to Myanmar. So China's in trouble, okay? But it's good news for you guys. Just don't make the same mistake, which that's what you're saying.
That's right. So China is no longer growing. China is beginning to have a crisis. It's importing less from the rest of the world. It's buying less commodities, less copper, all kinds of commodities. It's buying less. So this chart shows you an index of all of the major commodities. Commodity prices have fallen to the lowest level in 16 years because China is buying less commodities. And this is causing a worldwide crisis among all of the countries that produce commodities. Countries like Malaysia and Brazil and Russia.
Australia,
Canada, and even Vietnam. Commodity prices are falling. You are selling less commodities before. And this is why, because China's gone into crisis now. This chart shows world trade. You can see that world trade in the last 6 months, it's falling almost as much as in 2009. So the world has gone back into recession because China's going into recession. And this is negatively impacting the entire world. We have a new global recession. And China is not going to rebound. It's not going to recover next month, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, or even 5 years from now. China had a boom for 3 or 4 decades. It's going to have a very long bust. So this is going to persist. The age of the China boom is over. And this is going to act as a very significant drag on global economic growth for years ahead.
How many people understand what Richard is saying?
Oh.
Give yourselves a hand. Very smart. The reason is when I do these talks in America, must be the people I talk to, they have no idea what we're talking about. You know, Americans don't really realize what's going on. So this is a very interesting time. That's why again I'll promote Richard's macro watch. Because right now, his book, The Dollar Crisis, really opened my eyes. I'm like, oh my God. Because Richard saw it from a different point of view. I read other guys, they see different points of view. But what Dollar Crisis said was Japan boomed because they started shipping, this is after World War II, they started shipping us all these products, and we shipped Japan dollars. So the Japanese economy blew up. And the same thing happened in Thailand, right? Thailand blew up because all these dollars flowed in. Then Thailand collapsed. Okay. Then China boomed. Now the Chinese collapse, the reason I suggest you subscribe to MacroWatch is because every time I talk to Richard, I'm watching to find out where is that money running to. So the money is now running out of China. And if it flows into Vietnam, it's good and bad.
Yeah.
Because it'll blow your economy up. But I live in Hawaii. In Hawaii right now, The Chinese are running to Hawaii because they want to get their money out of China. So what's happening in Hawaii to buy a condominium, it costs you $600,000 US. Not to buy the thing, just to get your name on the list. Just to get your name on the list, you have to put up $600,000 US cash. The only people with that kind of money are Chinese. So the reason I talk to Richard on a regular basis, I'm wondering if the US economy will go into a bubble now, because money is flowing back into the US. But that's why his program, Macro Watch, and all this is important, because you want to stay attuned to where the money is flowing to right now. So right now it's flowing out of China. It's flowing out of Brazil, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. But I've got to watch where it's flowing to. Anything you want to say about that?
Yes, it's been one bubble after another bubble. Once the United States stopped backing its money with gold, we started buying more and more things from Japan in the 1970s and the 1980s. So Japan turned into a great bubble, and then it popped. It popped in 1989.
It hasn't recovered, has it?
It still hasn't recovered. Japan's economy is the same size today as it was in 1993. It hasn't grown since 1993. Next, I was living in Thailand from 1990 until 1996, and I watched Thailand's economy blow into a bubble. And when the Thai bubble popped, the stock market fell 95% in dollar terms. And that was 1997. The stock market still hasn't recovered. The same thing happened in Taiwan. Taiwanese stock market peaked in 1989. It still hasn't recovered. So what we've seen is one bubble after another as the US dollars flow into these countries and blow them into bubbles. And then the bubbles inevitably pop. And that's what's happening to China now. China's bubble is popping. It's buying less from all the rest of the world, and so the world is now going into recession. China became the second largest economy in the world. So it's very significant that this economy is now going into recession. And so that's why world trade is dropping, almost as much as at the peak of the crisis. But let me tell you now why Vietnam has much better prospects than the world. This is your time. I moved to Asia almost 30 years ago, and I've watched these economies evolve, and bubbles form and bubbles pop. And it's true that Vietnam is going to be negatively affected by the slowdown in the recession in China. You can see that this shows your export growth, how much it's growing every year. And okay, it's definitely slowing compared to the rate it was growing before. But look at the next chart. This shows you Vietnam's exports measured in billions of dollars, going back to 2006. In 2006, Vietnam exported $2 billion of goods every month. Your exports were $2 billion a month. Now, your exports are $14 billion a month. This is an enormous increase in your exports.
Give